crop the
Good.
awkward beginning. Okay. So the last thing that I found really interesting about the book that relates to something that I've experienced in my job has to do with chappers. The last thing that I wanted to Kelly. Okay. All right. Hang on. I'm going to put the book down. Okay. So chapter 16 on unemployment and chapter 17 on the indispensable employee, or it's staying competitive. Sorry, I'm not going to take up much more of your time here. Staying competitive. All right. So chapters 16 and 17, which are the first chapter dealing with unemployment and chapter 17 dealing with staying competitive in your work environment, are really interesting too. And I think as a new employee, one of the hardest parts is finding your purpose in the mix of things. Oftentimes you're working in an environment that's been there for a while. In my case, I'm working with a group that's been around for over 20 years. And so finding my niche in that group is difficult. And I think one of the biggest motivations is finding a purpose in your work. If you feel like what you're doing isn't important, then it's very hard to stay motivated. And those two chapters really highlight some ways that you can go about doing that. The unemployment chapter, although scary, talking about the possibility of losing your job, highlights something called becoming the indispensable employee. And one of the things that I sort of fell into at my job that kind of touches on that is there's this computer system we use that everyone hates. And everyone that does my job hates it. They don't want to learn it. They don't want to take the time. They complain about it. And I don't blame them because it is awful. But one of the things I did was I was like, okay, I'll be the person that figures this out. And people can come to me and ask me. And it'll be the thing that I know. And so I sat down, I figured it out, and young people tend to be a little better with computers and figuring stuff out anyways on computers. So that's something I did, and almost immediately I was the person people went to. So anyone else with my position in the office, if they had a question on how to use it, they would shoot me an email or come to my desk, and immediately that's another way that you can get noticed for something positive. And although it's just one computer program, the point is when a manager is doing an assessment of your purpose at an office, they can say, well, Aleeza is that person that took the time to understand that program that even I don't want to understand, and they might see that as a positive thing. And the other part of that, and chapter 17, staying competitive, it highlights other things you can do to get involved in the business culture in the city you live in or the city you're moving to. And it talks about volunteerism and getting involved in business networks, and those are just incredibly important. And one of the ways you can do that is even talking to other people in the office. What are some things they like to do outside of work that helps develop that network, which of course also leads to the chapter on networking in the book. But basically what I'm trying to get at is that it's really important to develop yourself in the community, especially if you're working to try to acquire clients or doing any sort of work where you need to make those connections. It's vital that you make those connections, and it can be along all sorts of lines. I know people that go to church together and get involved in churches. There are even business groups. I became a member of a women's business group in the city that I'm living in that I feel is a really great way to meet other professionals. And they can be intimidating, but the more time you spend at them, the better. And it's also nice, a lot of times business groups will meet at lunchtime, which is perfect when you're working because it's not 3 or 9 in the morning or a time where you're going to be at work. You can take your lunch hour and go and then come back to work, and you've made a really productive thing out of your hour lunch break. So those are the types of things that I think are really important to do on top of your work. And it seems overwhelming, but it does pay off, and actually it gives you something to talk about with other employees, something to talk about with clients, and just gives you a sense of pride and ownership in what you're doing both outside and inside the office. I think we're good. Okay. One of the chapters that I really like that's really important is Dressing for Success, which is chapter 2. And, it's a completely different culture. I'm going from an environment where I'm around people, the average age is 19, to an environment where the average age is about 45 or 50. And so the way I dress myself is another nonverbal indicator of who I am my professionalism, especially again when you're new at a job and you don't necessarily have the authority or voice to or the history of being able to describe yourself in other ways or other people describing you based on your history at the company. And so I use this example, the poor girl, but there was an intern at one point that she became known as the girl that wore the really short dress that one time. And, you know, it's not that anyone didn't, you know, were upset with that. Obviously, they felt bad. But at the same time, you know, that first initial moment where you create an image for yourself, if you're not being careful about what that image is, you know, people still talk to her about her to meetings and, you know, involved her in the company, but you don't want to develop that nickname or that association that may not be what you're trying to present. And there are going to be people that do kind of dress on the edge. There's, you know, I work with a woman that likes wearing a hot pink business suit, and she gets away with it because she's been there for 25 years. So just because somebody else, you know, might come into work in sweatpants one day for a half day, you as a new employee don't necessarily get that right, even if somebody else is doing it. So the book really does emphasize that, just kind of rules to make yourself, you know, have that unique personality and style without, you know, getting too close to those areas that can be dangerous. So I definitely recommend that chapter, especially being a woman, knowing that, you know, sometimes it's fun, jewelry, watches, and things like that. And for guys, like even a nice watch or a tie, and the book really kind of walks you through that process, which can be incredibly intimidating at a new job. Let's see here. Okay, let's see. All right, chapter 3 on verbal communication has a really great section for talking about how to conduct yourself in a meeting or presentation. And we all know how intimidating this is in a college environment around people your own age and people you're friends with. When you're presenting a topic to people that have been in the industry for 20 years, it can be even more frightening. And one of the things that really stuck with me is they say, don't apologize for your nervousness, because you know, you have a right to be up there if someone's asking you to be up there and talking. So just embrace that and use it as an opportunity to, you know, relay your information and show your smarts, and enjoy having that communication and that interaction with your peers at work. And the example I relate to it is I was thrown into a conversation in front of 30 they were new FAs, new financial advisors for the company, but they had been around much longer than I had, and I was asked impromptu to stand up and talk about my group's dynamics and some of the things we had been doing, and I almost died. I almost tripped walking up to the front of the room, and like the book says, you know, talk to some of them beforehand, make some of those connections, but even so, I was just incredibly nervous. And the one critique that a lot of them came to me with, and they were all very friendly about it, and they always will be, but the one critique I had was, you don't need to apologize. Like, you know, your apology made me feel bad for you, and you had something valid to say. So that made me realize that point, and the fact that it was included in the book was great. What was the other story I wanted to tell? Okay. My name is Aleeza Singh, and I am a senior at the University of Iowa, and I currently have a job in finance at Merrill Lynch. I'm hoping to start the portfolio management program this fall, but thus far I've been working in the administrative side of the business. And I received the book, Backpack to Briefcase, last year when I completed my CLA Career Leadership Academy program through the University of Iowa. And I find the book to be incredibly helpful. A lot of it is your basic concepts, your basic conflicts at work, but even though it's basic, it's a really good reminder of the things you should follow and the ideas you should have in your head going into a job. My one critique of the layout of the book would be that, although not as exciting, chapters 13 and 14, which highlight on making sense of your paycheck, is chapter 13, and understanding employee benefits, chapter 14. Although not as exciting, I think these are incredibly important before even entering a job. And the story I would have that goes along with this is, I know somebody that entered a career and they hadn't really thought about post-tax versus pre-tax pay and how that would make a difference. Oftentimes companies will give you a certain percentage of your pay that's taxed at a higher percentage. For example, it's given as a bonus, which might be taxed at 35%, that can have a huge dent on your cash flow for a month. And so he ended up having a very difficult time reallocating his cash flow during those first few months because he hadn't really thought about those crucial concepts when looking at the job and what was being offered to him. So it's great that it's at the back of the book because you get the fun stuff towards the beginning, but definitely before you take on a job, before you agree to take a job or go into an interview, understand those things so that you can ask, is there an employee or a employer matching for the 401k, and is there a participation plan of any sort with a company, profit participation. And so that's why I would suggest for anyone reading the book to go to the end first, read those few crucial chapters about dollars and cents, because you're going to spend so much time at your job, you need to make sure that you're getting out of it what you need. But then, of course, the first few chapters are really cool, and I think really great at pumping you up for your job. So, chapters about dressing for success, chapter 2. Verbal and nonverbal communication, really important because these are basically talking about the 3 main ways that you're going to showcase yourself in a new job setting, and especially the nonverbal communications. A lot of times in the first few months of a job, you're going to be doing a lot of listening. It's important that when you're listening, how are you listening? And the book really shows you ways to, stand up straight, nod your head, ask follow-up questions, things that really will show an employer that you're interested without you needing to talk and talk, because you may not know what you're talking about at that point. So staying interested in your body language is very important. Dressing for success, it's a totally different culture, and in my job I'm working with people with the average age of around 50, so it's a completely new environment for me, and people dress differently. And I could start that.